You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
This is an ad from BetterHelp. This holiday season, do something for a special person in your life. You. Give yourself the gift of better mental health. BetterHelp Online Therapy connects you with a qualified therapist via phone, video, or live chat. It's convenient and affordable and can be done from the comfort of your own home. Having someone to talk to is truly a gift, especially during the holidays. Visit BetterHelp.com to learn more and save 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
A Republican newspaper, the Atchison Champion in Atchison, Kansas, is a little bitter after the 1892 election, but tries to find a silver lining for its readers. One of the very few comforting assurances that we have to rely on just now is that the campaign poet is to be corked up for 4 long halcyon years. This beautiful fact should be brought to the attention of those who may be disappointed in their expectation to the success of their party's ticket. Something that rings true today, right? Isn't everyone happy about no longer getting those emails and no longer getting those texts asking for money, asking you to please remember to vote? Before we begin, I want to announce something. Ad-free episodes on the Patreon. So if you sign up for www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com and join everybody there, lots of members who are signed up for the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics Patreon, not only do you get extra episodes, you'll also get these episodes ad-free. I'm now running this feed on the other, so you can enjoy that. It's a new thing for me. Other podcasters do it, so I'm joining in. And thanks to those who have supported us. Now back to 1892. The Fayette Press in Fayette, Iowa, writes a note. Democratic papers are superlatively jubilant after the election of the Democratic national ticket. Roosters, eagles, cranes, storks, pelicans, elephants, and mules are all drawn into the parade. One newspaper comforts, or you might even say coddles, its readers in the time of election. Now, everybody will be bowing to the feet of victors, while those who lost will sit in the shadows, grieving alone. And perhaps the one who weeps is 10 times more worthy than the one who wears the laurel. But another newspaper refuses to gaslight. This is simply the case of the Republican Party being gobbled by the Democratic toad. They will jubilate. The Times-Union, Albany, New York. They will jubilate. The latest returns give Mr. Grover Cleveland, the former president of the United States, 299 votes in the Electoral College. Mr. Harrison won 121 as of this time, and General Weaver 24. The next United States Senate will probably stand Democrats 42, Republicans 41, Farmers Alliance 5. Mr. Cleveland's plurality in New York State is 42,799 votes. 4 years ago, he lost the state by 627. Already the times are better. The resurrection day has come. Benjamin is in the cold, cold ground. The Grenada, Mississippi Sentinel. It was not a landslide. It was an earthquake. Wanamaker can go back to his bargain counter. The Republican Party is knocked to kingdom come. From this item in the New York World, we learn one of the reasons why Benjamin Harrison might have lost this election and Cleveland won it. The Republicans of the New York World said, "Lost the laboring man." They quote Joseph Medill, the editor of the Chicago Tribune at this time, who says, "The great masses of laboring people were dissatisfied and also ignorant of the true cause of their troubles. They blamed the McKinley Bill. They listened to opponents saying it protected the already rich manufacturers, but gave the poor man no relief. And whenever a man became suddenly rich in this world, they attributed it to the McKinley tariff measure." In North Carolina, the votes come in slowly, but it appears the populists are taking as much vote from the Republicans as they are from the Democrats. In Michigan, which splits its electoral vote at this time by congressional district, Michigan will give at least 5 electoral votes to Democrat Cleveland. In the state of Kansas, there is little probability of any definite returns being received until late. The populists in Kansas have insisted on the law providing each ballot shall be checked up as complete when taken from the box and examined, and in Kansas this law is complied with to the letter, but it has slowed everything down. And this has resulted in delaying the count from Kansas to such an extent that no figures of any consequence have been reported yet. Here's the Anaconda Recorder in New Northwest. The Stuffed Prophet, this was a jokey name for Cleveland, is elected by a good round majority, and the coming 4 years will prove to the working classes that they have done wrong in casting their vote for this man. He was successful in carrying New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Ohio, Wisconsin, and the fusion with the third party made it possible for him to carry Indiana. We accept this defeat with grace, but have a feeling of sympathy for the manufacturers of this great nation. West Virginia, owing to the delay caused in the count by the Australian ballot, which is being tried for the first time, definitive figures cannot be given. Louisiana shows a plurality for Cleveland. So does Kentucky. So does Georgia. Tonight, Chattanooga, Tennessee had a Cleveland ratification parade, the like of which has never been witnessed in this section of the country. Men paraded in all kinds of fantastic costumes. A leading feature of the parade was a large elephant, which a circus man, who happened to be in the city today, ended up betting and losing. This elephant was painted red and ridden through the streets by the young man who won it. Such a cheer was raised by the paraders and observers of this elephant that the brass bands could not be heard. And to add to the noise, every bell and steam whistle in the city of Chattanooga and its suburbs clanged and whistled during the parade. Chattanooga turned the night into a hilarious Mardi Gras. There was no hilarity in Ohio. It's initially claimed by both parties, until results come in and reveal it has gone Republican by a small plurality. It going Democrat would have been the biggest news of the night. No Democrat since Franklin Pierce had won this state. Other states going for the president, Benjamin Harrison, is Oregon and the state of Washington. Pennsylvania will prove to be President Harrison's 4th strongest victory. He'll also win Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts. But he's losing almost everywhere else. Not only to Benjamin Harrison, but also to the third party in the 1892 race, the Populist, or People's Party, or Farmers Alliance, however it appears on the ballot in various states, and their presidential candidate, James Weaver. Weaver, a newspaper says, has swept Colorado from one end to the other. The San Francisco Examiner, November 10, 1892. When Grover Cleveland made his appearance in the morning, he attacked his mail with vigor. He denied himself to representatives, the press, and begged to be excused from expressing any opinion as to the result. Messengers kept Cleveland's doorbell ringing all day. Mrs. Cleveland was in high spirits this morning, and she said simply, "Of course, we were very much pleased with the news about the election." President Harrison, on hearing the news from Illinois, that Illinois has gone Democrat, reacts. The president gave up the election when he heard from Illinois last night, remarking, if Illinois has gone Democratic, that settles it. And he requested that no further returns be brought to him. Mr. Tibbet, his stenographer, at 10 o'clock this morning was still figuring out some possible combination of states which might snatch victory from defeat. But he doesn't know what that is yet. Secretary of State Blaine, at this time, as famous a Republican as President Harrison is, sunk into his Lafayette Square home in the nation's capital. He has a cold, it is said, though he's known to be a bit of a hypochondriac. He has a cold, but is feeling better. Nonetheless, post-election, he has the telephone removed from his residence, so as to avoid the annoyances of perpetual calls. Okay, so let's put this all in perspective. What are we doing here? It's 1892. In fact, it's November 1892. After the election, I'm in this episode looking at some newspaper accounts, real newspaper accounts, to give you a sense of what it was like the last time former president of the United States was elected again with a term in between. And there's a lot of interesting notes that really seem like today. One of the surprising things, too, it's a little similar today, is returns come in November 9th, November 10th. You even go out to November 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and you have some states that haven't fully reported yet. So, this part of it is not really new. And I know, we're talking about 1890s. We should really have better technology now and everything like that. We should really count faster now, it seems. But it's certainly not new. It's only the blowout elections where you get that fast reporting. Nonetheless, it is pretty clear here in 1892 by the November 9th or November 10th that Cleveland's won the election. But something that's close to what's going on in 2024, did you hear about, is Grover Cleveland's vote total was higher than what he got 4 years before, and higher in some cases than the down ticket. This was not expected. For instance, in Illinois, the surprise was the presidential ticket. It was expected that Atgill is the governor of Illinois, it is expected that Atgill's vote would exceed Cleveland's, but it's not happening. Atgill is, in some circles, might be described as socialist. In fact, in the newspaper, he's described as the German Democratic candidate for governor. But it's a little bit surprising that Cleveland gets as many votes as Atgill does. The same thing's happening in New York, where it was thought that because Cleveland, not always a popular Democrat in all circles, especially the Machine, the Irish vote, the Tammany Hall, that's because Grover Cleveland is, you might say, a different type of Democrat as what existed in the 19th century, and particularly the bulk of the party at this time, where their South and West is where the party's strength is. And yet you have an Eastern Democrat leading the ticket. He is a conservative Democrat, a Bourbon Democrat. Now, I always tinker with that a little, because Cleveland will always disappoint you when you try to pin him down. I got this great quote, for instance, from him, where he essentially says, when talking about agitation from communists, and Grover Cleveland's comment is, people with wealth and power who form trusts, big businesses, can be just as much communists as those working class people who riot and protest and things like that, because they're seeking the government's aid in their domination. Cleveland is conservative in a lot of ways, but that also includes, in some cases, unfairness in terms of business advantage. He sees the tariff issue in these terms. And I think it's just a funny thing. I didn't think when I started a podcast in 2006 that tariffs would come back as an issue. There was really no major party that wasn't free trade in 2006 when I started. So explaining things like tariff issues, it didn't always make sense. And now it's interesting to see that change. I want to explain what's going on in 1892, and I'll talk a little bit about 2024. So on one level, you could say, my God, it's so comparable to today because the big issue in the 1892 election is tariffs. McKinley, William McKinley, at this time congressman from Ohio, has raised tariffs. His bill raised some tariffs as high as 35 or 50%. Those fees on items like tin, like tools, like farm equipment, even some breakfast commodities, table commodities, sugar, salt, coffee, tea, things that, anything that has to be imported in any measure, goes right to consumers. And in the 1890 midterms, they punished Republicans for having voted for that bill. This punishment is continuing in the 1892 presidential election. And Grover Cleveland is very much campaigning on this tariff issue. Now, first of all, I do want to say that the McKinley tariffs are high. They're extreme in a sense. They're made to protect industries, not just to deal with other countries, say, or engage in a fair reciprocal trade, say. They're actually designed specifically so that goods won't be imported. So, say a company that makes tin products in Pennsylvania or Massachusetts will have a bigger market and get more customers than one that's coming in from Peru, Brazil, or England. You are very much going to see in this election afterwards in November news items from the Australian newspapers, news items from Scotland and Wales newspapers that are going to celebrate the fact that the Democratic ticket has been elected. I'm going to read a bit from Alan Nevin's Study in Courage now. The magnitude of Cleveland's victory astonished everyone, for it was the most decisive since the re-election of Lincoln in 1864. No one was surprised to find the doubtful states, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Indiana, slip into his column. But that he should sweep Illinois, Wisconsin, California, that was extraordinary. No Republican had believed these states were in danger, and no Democrat seriously predicted their conquest, except, I will point out, correcting the great biographer Nevins a bit, when I did my last podcast on Grover Cleveland, he said that he'd win Wisconsin and Illinois. And because his campaign manager was saying, you've got to deal with the political machine in New York. And he said, no, I don't need to. I'm going to win this election by winning other states. Which states? Wisconsin and Illinois. That's crazy. No Democrat wins there. The Wisconsin state of Wisconsin was the birthplace of the Republican Party. No, Cleveland says, I'm going to win it. And narrowly, he does. Less than 10,000 votes. Nevins continues, seldom has an election been so confused by a third party as this one. And that's because you have the Populist Party. General James Weaver is running as its president. It's a radical party. They want silver coinage. They want money to be made and credit be made available to average people, land to be made available to people, control over farm prices, all sorts of things that the Republicans are opposed to, and for the most part, Democrats are opposed to too. The populists are against both Harrison and Cleveland, but in various states, they'll work with either of them. In the South, where Democrats are strong, populists try to work with Republicans. But there's not enough votes there to cover what are essentially strong Democratic machines. And in the West, however, combinations, fusionists, they're called, Democrats voting along with populists are winning some states. In Kansas, Republicans are particularly sour about the defeat of President Harrison. Such a Republican state. Bleeding Kansas. Yet it's been turned by the tide of third-party populism. The Atchison Champion newspaper, once again. The men who stood up for Kansas seem to be lying down. In our opinion, Kansas has been lost by the Republicans, both at the state and the electoral tickets. Possibly the Undertaker's trust had something to do with these grave results. 78.3% of eligible voters participate in 1892. Grover Cleveland wins the popular vote margin by 400,000. It's the largest since Ulysses S. Grant's re-election in 1872. Historic victory. They also capture both houses of Congress, so that's the first time Democrats have done it since 1856. And coming after the Civil War, where the party's been tagged with the bloody shirt, with conspiracy with the Confederacy, and it is a party that still has a base in the South. This is a big success. And success, it turns out, has 1,000 fathers. Though experts were confounded on Monday, by Tuesday, they all know all the answers. This is no different in 1892 as today. You David Plouffe and you Nate Cohens appear, suddenly full of wisdom. And one of the things that you hear is Cleveland wins in 1892 because of young voters. Yes, there are young people who were born too young for the Civil War, and those old, ancient political preferences of voting how you shot are gone now. Another factor here is crossovers. And the way to say it in today's parlance is Cleveland was making inroads into several demographic groups. For instance, German Americans. Carl Schurz, who had supported Abraham Lincoln. He's a leading German American publisher. He's a writer, he's a politician. He comes on the Grover Cleveland bandwagon. When Benjamin Harrison swaps out his vice president, Levi Morton, a New York industrialist and a money guy, for Whitelaw Reid, more of a progressive publisher, people are upset about how Morton was treated. So you got some Republicans against Harrison for that. The Republican Party faces additional challenges and divisive policies, prohibition. This is happening at the state level, and Republicans are leading it. Alienates immigrant communities, particularly German Americans. But if Republicans don't do some state-level prohibition, we're not talking about a federal amendment just yet, there's a prohibition party in this race as well, and it gets almost 3% of the vote. Almost all of those votes are coming from the Republican ticket. Albany Times-Union pokes fun at the excuses they imagine will be coming down the pike. It does not seem to have been the weather that interfered with Republicans on Election Day. The sentimentalist among them would have talked about the snow interfering at the election, if it not had been for the sunshine that day.
Shop Blinds.com's Cyber Monday sales event now for some of the best deals of the season. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 50% site-wide, plus doorbusters and a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The fight for racial justice in America is long. It's complex. Most of us only know bits and pieces of it. Many of those bits are often oversimplified, or we get them straight up wrong. They're sanitized, distorted, buried. This makes the struggle for racial justice so much harder. Just ask this school teacher in South Carolina.
We probably seem crazy to some folks, because we've been taught all our lives through the educational system and propaganda just to pretty much survive and try to thrive in the society. But some of our spirits just ain't, acquiescing to this system.
I'm Ruxandra Guidi, and I'm the host of Happy Forgetting, a podcast about racial justice in America and those spirits that guide us in the struggle when memory fails us. It's an anthology of stories, 6 different styles, 6 different perspectives from around the country. There are no tidy endings, but there's possibility in learning, and sometimes there's even progress. Coming soon. Follow Happy Forgetting wherever you get your podcasts.
In faraway Idaho, the state does not vote for President Harrison. It votes for James Weaver. It's a small state, and populists are able to win the electorate over. In Montana, a state dominated by mining interests, Republicans win. Papers in these 2 states don't seem to be bothered too much by the election results and are more concerned with trivia items for their readers and getting back to business. I see an ad for Henry Dean, dealer in wines, liquor, cigars, and tobacco. Glendive, Montana, sole agent for the Anheuser-Busch Budweiser beer. The Yellowstone Hotel, the best hotel in town because it's the only hotel in town. Guests can depend upon a clean room, a square meal, and honorable treatment. W.A. Bull, the Blackfoot live merchant, is to the front, open and ready for business, with his keen tomahawk, cutting and slashing his stock of general merchandise to Eastern prices. Not those rip-off Western prices. I will take farmers' produce at cash prices in exchange for merchandise. This from the Idaho Statesman. Could he use a ticket for his own corpse? Can a live man travel on a ticket, calling for a first-class passage for a corpse? This novel question confronts the Santa Fe Road, and the decision will be watched with some interest by other lines. Some weeks ago, Harry Knight of Denver was taken to St. Luke's Hospital in this city. His case seemed hopeless, and his sister in Denver was so informed. She thereupon bought a round-trip ticket Denver to Chicago for herself, and a, quote, return ticket for a body in a casket. She came here and an operation was performed on her brother, which proved successful. He rallied and so far recovered that he was able to go home. As a ticket had been bought and paid for, he proposed to use it, although not, as had been expected, as the occupant of a coffin. He tried to obtain passage upon the ticket, but difficulties met him at every point. The ticket read, good for the passage of one human body contained in a casket, from Chicago to Denver. The human body referred to tendered the ticket, and the conductor did not know what to do. He finally decided to take the ticket and leave the matter for the settlement with the company afterwards. Meantime, Mr. and Mrs. Knight are safe at home in Denver. From the South Sioux City Press, South Sioux City, Nebraska, they have these little notes, which are little trivia items that are very common in the newspapers. The condor soars higher than any other bird, spending 9/10 of its time floating in the rarefied atmosphere at a distance of 3 miles above sea level. Jedo, the capital of the Japanese Empire, contains 4 million inhabitants. That means Jedo has a population higher than London. Jedo is the former name of Tokyo. A New York oyster house keeper has discovered in a little neck clam a pearl for which he has already been offered a good price. A San Francisco firm is about to attempt a revival of a whaling expedition in the Antarctic Ocean, which has not been carried out for as many as 25 years. A quarter of a century ago, the catches of sperm used to be excellent there, and many of the whalers are now of the opinion that the southern seas will again afford a profitable field for operations. Don't tobacco spit or smoke your life away. The wonderful, harmless, guaranteed cure for chewing, smoking, cigarette habit, or snuff dipping, not tobacco, is the only guaranteed tobacco habit cure in the world that's sold by druggists. Mention this paper, the Sterling Remedy Company, 45 Randolph Street, Chicago, and mention not tobacco, and get mailed a book for free. Sheep for sale, 2,400 head of fine, young, well-bred Oregon ewes, in good condition, are for sale at a bargain. For full particulars, call the Tribune office at once. The newspaper describes a football game between Yale and Pennsylvania. Yes, Yale and the University of Pennsylvania played each other November 12th, 1892, right after the election, at Manhattan Field in New York City, which would later become called the Polo Grounds. The game began at 2 p.m. The toss was won by Yale, and she chose the ball to test their opponent's blocking strength. The wedge, a group of men together blocking the other, was first tried by Yale. A little ground was gained. The Captain McCormick decided to change his tactics and depend for success upon the fleetness of the brothers Bliss by running around the ends. 2 halfbacks succeeded in carrying the ball to the Pennsylvania 25-yard line. They could get no further, as the ball went to University men. Reese was caught playing offside during scrimmage, and as a consequence, the ball went back to Yale. Bliss shot around the end of the Pennsylvania line, and when his force was spent, only 10 yards needed to be gained by the wearers of blue to score the touchdown. Yes, Yale wins this game 28-0 in a surprise, scoring 22 points in the first half. The New York Times notes that Yale's innovative use of interference, that's really to be seen today as blocking, players who have the ball blocking the other players aggressively so that their man can get through, clearing the way for the ball carrier, describing it as a new wrinkle in the game plan. This was a significant innovation in the sport as it transitioned from its rugby origins. Yale, under influential figures like Walter Camp, was at the forefront of these changes. It was both effective and controversial. Critics argued that interference or blocking reduced the emphasis on individual athleticism, which had been central to the sport's earlier versions. But it proved to be a game-changing strategy. This was Pennsylvania's only loss in a 15-1 season over its head coach, George Washington Woodruff. No one in New York City, the papers say, can mistake the house that is Cleveland's. The crowd and the hubbub around it is considerable. On election night, Cleveland's house in West 51st Street is crowded, And all of these friends and new friends are there until 3 a.m. with all kinds of celebrations. But Cleveland is not so celebratory in this moment. He's solemn. Entering the clubroom of his guest house, he gives a short speech to those who have gathered. While we find in our triumph the result of popular intelligence which we have aroused, and a consequence of popular vigilance which we have stimulated, let us not for a moment forget that our ascension to power will find neither this intelligence nor the vigilance dead or slumbering. We must put on a garb befitting public servants. And it fits the moment, because what's going to happen 10 days before Grover Cleveland can even take office is a major railroad. The Philadelphia Railroad goes bankrupt. And something else happens. Although the country had been plagued with the prices rising due to those tariffs, and it helped the Democratic Party in the 1890 midterms and certainly the 1892 election, there's now a new threat. The opposite thing. Prices are declining rapidly, and deflation, when it rears its ugly head, is worse than inflation. It means people simply can't buy goods. People will be pining for the time when prices on durable goods, on manufactured items, will go up, when factories can reopen. They'll be pining till about 1897. But right now, all of that is in the future. Between the election and inauguration, Cleveland brings in a friend, the doctor, Wilton Smith. And he says, "Dr. Smith, let me read to you my inaugural speech." Dr. Smith relays this story later when Cleveland reads the speech for him. "While there should be no surrender of principle, our task must be undertaken wisely and without heedless vindictiveness. Our mission is not punishment, but the rectification of wrong. When we tear aside the delusions and misconceptions which have blinded our countrymen to the condition under vicious tariff laws, we must show them how far they have been led away from the paths of contentment and prosperity. Above all, I know there is a supreme being who rules the affairs of men and whose goodness and mercy have always followed the American people. And I know he will not turn from us now. We humbly and reverently seek his powerful aid." And when he's done reading these lines, Grover Cleveland, according to Dr. Smith's account, kind of rubs his eyes and says, "Doctor, I suppose at times you will not approve of what I do, but I'm trying to do what is right." He repeats that. "I have a hungry party, and there's a lot of demands being placed upon me. I'm trying to do what is right." I want to thank you for listening. Remember about the Patreon. You can get a lot more content there, plus ad-free episodes. Ad-free episodes on the Patreon. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley Livesey from the History of the Second World War podcast. Join me on a journey through the most destructive conflict in human history, a journey that will take us not just through the famous campaigns and cataclysmic battles, but also to the lesser well-known corners of the war that touched millions all over the world, as we try and answer not just the questions of what and where, but how and why. You can find History of the Second World War on all major podcast platforms or at historyofthesecondworldwar.com.